up, guys? Mr. Drosty here, and today we're going to be talking about something that the American colonists called the Intolerable Acts. Now, over in England, when the Parliament passed these five acts, they were referred to as the Coercive Acts. Many people look at these five acts as one of the final straws in the lead up to the American Revolution, which began in 1775. Now, the big idea here with the Intolerable Acts, as you see here on the screen, is they were punishments divvied out by Parliament for what had happened at the Boston Tea Party in December of 1773. So when the British Parliament passes these in 1774, it's to kind of prove a point, that they're going to assert their control over the American colonies. Now, these laws did not just apply to Boston. We're going to see where Boston is the primary place where the first act in the Intolerable Acts goes into effect. But some of these other ones, they're going to affect all of the original 13 colonies. So we're going to go through these very briefly so that you have kind of a well-rounded understanding of what the colonists referred to as the Intolerable Acts and what the English called the Coercive Acts. So let's get to it. So as you can see here on the screen, the first Intolerable Act was the Boston Port Act, and what it did is it closed the Boston Harbor to trade until the city paid back the East India Company for all of the destroyed tea from the Boston Tea Party. That would be 92,000 pounds of destroyed tea. In today's dollars, almost $2 million of destroyed tea. Now, people in Boston didn't like this because it was only a fraction of the population that committed the Boston Tea Party, and they didn't think that ruining their trading system out of Boston Port was fair to, do that to everybody that lived in Boston, to harm everyone, when it was only the Sons of Liberty that committed the Boston Tea Party. So the Boston Port Act was number one. Now, the second of the Intolerable Acts is what is referred to as the Massachusetts Government Act. Now, the colonies were often very self-governed. They would have these town meetings to decide local matters. Under the Massachusetts Government Act, they were only able to have town meetings once per year unless specifically given the authority by their royal governor. So I think one of the ideas behind this is they didn't want the colonists to organize in large groups multiple times throughout the year because they were scared of a revolt happening. The third of the Intolerable Acts was called the Administration of Justice Act. Now, what this did is it said that anytime someone who was, say, working for the British government, a British soldier, for example, if they were accused of a crime in the colonies, they could have their trial moved back to England or to a different colony if it was believed that they could not get a fair trial where the crime occurred. Now, obviously, if you're working for the British government and you're accused of a crime, because of there being more and more anti-British sentiment throughout the colonies, you're going to argue that you can't get a fair trial wherever that crime occurred. Now, the colonists believed that this was complete and utter nonsense because all you had to do was look at what happened in the aftermath of the Boston Massacre, when a local Boston lawyer by the name of John Adams defended the British soldiers who had killed the Americans in Boston in March of 1770. So to them, that proved that, in fact, yes, British soldiers could get a free and fair trial wherever their crime occurred. George Washington was said to have referred to this act as the Murder Act because he said it gave British soldiers leeway to harass and even murder Americans and then just have the trial elsewhere and get away with it. The fourth of the so-called Intolerable Acts is probably the most famous. This is the Quartering Act. This made the Americans so furious that, in fact, when our U.S. Constitution is written, they put into the Bill of Rights specifically that quartering of soldiers is banned in the United States. So the Quartering Act actually was not new. They had the Quartering Act for several decades before this, but the update to the Quartering Act in 1774 as part of the Intolerable Acts said that the governor could go about, and that being the royal governor, could go about finding housing and food for soldiers if they needed it. Now, previously, it was kind of up to the colonial legislatures to give quarter to the troops, and they were very much not cooperative in doing so. Under the new Quartering Act, the governor could find quartering for the soldiers. Now there was some debate, or there is some debate if this actually happened in private residences. In the Intolerable Acts, Quartering Act of 1774, usually what happened is they would find housing arrangements for the soldiers in unoccupied buildings. Now, when the war breaks out, that being the Revolutionary War, we know that in fact, yes, citizens were forced to quarter soldiers in their private homes. This especially happened in New York after, in 1776, the British got control over New York. And throughout New York State and New York City in particular, there were private citizens that were forced to quarter soldiers in their homes and provide food to them without their expenses being reimbursed in any fashion. Now, the final Intolerable Act was passed during the same session of Parliament as the other four, and although it applies basically to what would become a different country, Canada, the colonists at the time looked at this as one and the same and part of the Intolerable Acts, and that is the Quebec Act. And what the Quebec Act did is it enlarged the size of the province of Quebec. It extended southwest further than it had before into the Ohio River Valley. And in fact, it was Quebec now encroaching on what the colonists believed was territory that they had fought the French for in the French and Indian War. And now the British government is turning around and letting people that used to be part of the French Empire, that are now controlled by the British, Canada, expand into the territory that in many cases these 13 American colonies had fought for, the Ohio River Valley. So they didn't like that. It also provided for the free practice of Catholicism, French Catholicism, in that territory. And the American colonies at the time were overwhelmingly Protestant. Even throughout the 1800s, America would be very, very Protestant, and there was a lot of anti-Catholic bigotry going on in the colonies. And when they saw that the British government was kind of accommodating all these Catholics in Canada within their empire now, they thought that they were being way, way too lenient towards them when they were really ramping down all of these new laws and rules on them, the original British colonies here on the East Coast. So they didn't like the Quebec Act, and they certainly didn't like the other four that we just went through. So these are the Coercive Acts, often called the Intolerable Acts, which went into effect in 1774, and they set the United States, or what's going to become known as the United States very soon, on the path to revolution the following year in 1775, when fighting breaks out at Lexington and Concord. So at this point, we're almost to the American Revolution. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, check out the other videos on the channel. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button, which you can find right here to my right, or hit that subscribe button down below by the video description. We'll see you next time.